Good morning, everyone. I'm Ishan and I welcome you to the first session of motion design. Today, we'll be covering the basics of After Effects, and later down the session, we'll also discuss the four core animation principles. And at the end, we'll make a project of a bouncing ball using the techniques we've learned. So, I will just start sharing my screen as well. I hope my screen is visible. So, the first part of the session would be an introduction to Adobe After Effects. We'll be going over the panels, keyframes, and the compositions. So panels are basically sections that give you access to various tools for allowing you to work in the program. And using these panels, you can perform various different functions. Now I'll just change my screen to Adobe After Effects so I can explain to you there as well. Okay, so whenever you start whenever you start After Effects for the first time, you will see the screen, and accept will not be welcome back, will just be welcome. And you don't have to do a lot here, you can just close it. So this is the entire screen. When you open it for the first time, you might not actually understand what's happening, because I mean, when you see it, it doesn't really give you a clear idea of what you should be doing here. But I'll just break down everything into 5 panels, so it's a lot more easier. Also, this is Adobe After Effects for everyone who doesn't know what the software we'll be using today. Right. So on the top here, there's the toolbar where you will see the generic toolbars that's in every Adobe software, the file, edit, composition, etc. After that is the tools section, where you can go to the home section again, where you can see your recent files, or open new projects, or just open previous projects as well. And then you get to see the selection tool, which is what you'll be defaulted to every time you open After Effects. And then there's the hand tool. Everything else is grayed out because they're not usable right now, and only once we start making new compositions they will come in use. The next thing we see here is the project panel, and every time you click a panel, there'll be a blue light that's highlighted around it. You can change this color as well, which we might discuss on another day. So this is the project panel where all of your assets and compositions will be managed. Everything will stay here. Everything you import, or you can also create new folders where you can store things. For example, you can make a folder called compositions and store all your compositions here. You can even make a folder for your assets. So that entirely depends on what you want to store. The next thing is the effect controls, where basically for every layer, if you add an effect, every single effect in that layer will show up here, so you can control it and change the settings or whatever you do. The next thing is the timeline, which is one of the most important panels. The timeline is where on the left side of the timeline, where it's mostly black, is where you will manage all your layers and even animate the layer and effect properties. On the right side, you will position layers in time. And here there are a lot of options even to change blending modes, which we'll talk about later as well. The one in the center is the composition, wherein basically you will get a live preview of whatever you're animating, kind of like a real-time render. On the rightmost side is the panel where are there are actually a bunch of panels here. For most part, you don't need all of them. Yes, these 5 are the most important. There are a lot of other panels that you can open here, but we'll not be using them right now. There are only 5 important ones that we'll be using most of the time. So if you don't like this nature where it's stacked, and when you open one, maybe you don't see the others because it just goes down, you can actually go to panel group settings and click uncheck stacked panel group. So they all become side to side. Now it depends on your preference. If you want it, you can do. as well. Right now, maybe you just don't like how the default AI looks, and you want to change it as per your preference. So what you'll do in this case is whenever you go in the corners of every panel, like here, you'll see some sliders which you can adjust. What I'd recommend is you drag the effects controls here, and as you can see, there are a lot of indications here. So if you put it on the left most, it will make a new panel. If you put it into this, it will just make a new panel inside this boundary. What I'd recommend is to place it at the corner, so you have a lot of space to watch the effect controls. And this is not very important as of now, so you can just keep it like this. Otherwise, anything else is your preference. You can make workspaces. And once you're done with making workspaces, what you do is you go to Window, Workspace, and you can do Save as New Workspace. You can give any name to it. For example, if I just write ABC, it will show up here. If you can see, these are a few workspaces I have. I'm currently on the default one, and you can change workspace here as well. That the ones that After Effects gives you. So yes, you can. This is the workspace that I'm in, the ABC which we created. If you make any edits, you can just go here and do save changes, and it will automatically save it. Right. I think that was mostly what we'll be seeing related to the interface. There's nothing much in this. I think now I'll go into starting a new composition altogether. So when you want to start a new composition, there are multiple ways. One of them being just here, you can just click on new composition, or you can click on this button as well for making a new composition. What I generally do is to use shortcuts, and shortcuts are going to save a lot of time. And as a lot of people who are in the motion design industry say, the less you use your mouse, the more time you save. So you have to try doing all your functions in your keyboard and try learning a lot of shortcuts. You will get a cheat sheet at the end of the session where there's a lot of useful uh, shortcuts. So you can refer to that as well. Also, if you have any doubts, we'll be covering them at the end, because then the class would be interrupted and we won't be able to complete everything on time. Okay. So when you want to create a new composition, you would press Control N. And that's a shortcut for it. You can press Control N to make a new composition. And the options you see, there are actually three main options that you need to change when you're making a new composition. The name is obvious. It doesn't come under the three. You can just name it anything. The first one here is the resolution. So the resolution is basically the pixel width against the pixel height. So there are two different types of resolutions that you can refer to mostly. There are a lot of presets here, but you don't have to do anything to them. They're just there for vanity purposes. It's not very important. So what you could do, there are two types of resolutions. One can be the standard 1080p, which is 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels tall. This is the one we generally see in websites like YouTube. And if you want the Instagram real dimensions, which is the other way around, it's height 1920 and width 1080 pixels. So that's what that's the resolution you would put if you want to make a reel for Instagram, or a similar like a YouTube short as well. So for now, I'll just keep it at 1080p, which is 1920 into 1080. The next thing is the frame rate. So what are actually frames? It basically frames our unit of a film time. So in the sense that videos are actually made up of individual pictures that we call as frames, which are played at some specific speed depending on the frames per second. Generally, videos you see on the internet are run at 29.97 frames per second, and films are mostly at 24 frames per second. So if you just want to define what FPS of frames per second is, it's basically the frequency at which every consecutive image appears per second. You don't have to think a lot about it. You just either use 24 or 30, but I'd always recommend never go above 30, because then that can lag your computer and also not really pose much of a difference. The next part is the duration. What you do with the duration is, well, it's basically just the duration of a video, and you can just set it to anything. Right now it's basically set at hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So right now it's at 15 seconds. A quick way to just put the durations is basically, if you want 10 seconds, you'll put 10 and put a dot for the frames, and you'll get 10 seconds, right? Like just it shows. If you put 10 and you put two dots, so basically one dot is for seconds and one dot is for frames, you will see that it's 10 minutes. And if you put 10 and you put three dots, you will see that it's well, it won't go to 10 hours, it's just at maximum 3 hours. So if I wanted 20 seconds, I'll just do 20, put a dot, and then I'll get a composition of 20 seconds. As you can see, it spans for 20 seconds. This thing that I'm moving is the playhead right now, which you can just move around and go across time. So one more thing I would like to tell you is how you can move across using your keyboard shortcuts. If you want to move across one frame, you will press Control and right arrow. So it'll go one. So you'll generally go one frame with that. If you just press it multiple times, you go multiple frames. If you want to go 10 frames at a second, 10 frames at one time, then you do Control Shift and right arrow key. So you can go 10 frames at once and multiple frames if you do it multiple times. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to see is how you can import artworks from either Illustrator or Photoshop, because in your task, you have to import artwork. So I'll just show you how to do that. So to import any assets, you just either double click on your screen on the project panel, or you press Control I on the project panel and click on whatever artwork you have. For example, if I'm opening this, so it'll ask you for a few options. The options that you must choose is composition and layer size. Never choose footage, because then you will not be able to edit the art at all, right? So always put it on composition and layer size. Okay. So if you open this composition that got created, you will see that there is an artwork here. Now I will tell you how you can actually zoom in or zoom out. If you want to zoom in into it, you just use the mouse scroll. Yeah, and if you want to zoom in at a particular place, you put your mouse cursor on top of it and use Alt and zoom, so you can zoom towards it. And one more thing you can do is to use the hand tool, which is this, which you can just use to move across, like you zoom and then move across here or move across anywhere you want to in the screen. A shortcut to this would be to hold spacebar and move, which is a lot more intuitive if you just do it that way. Now, if you just zoom in too much, for example, and you want to fit it back into how it looks, you'll have to press on this and put on fit, so it can come back and fit to your screen. And one more thing you could do is your shortcut called shift plus question mark. That does the same thing as well. Now, one thing you might be noticing is that this is very blurry and not really that sharp or something that you would like to see. It's because the resolution is at quarter right now, and the less resolution you put, the more faster everything happens, and the less your computer lags. If you want, you can also put it full, and everything becomes a little more sharper. But generally, I keep it at quarter because then I would be saving time, and it will not take a lot of time to render everything. Now, a few other things that you can do. As you can see, these are all the layers that are here. You can select one layer just normally. And if you select one layer and press shift and select any other, everything between also gets selected. Something else that you can do is to select a layer. For example, I will select the table. This is the table. And you can either hide it by pressing on this, or you can solo it. Solo means it will only show that. So if you do this, you only see that. And if you lock it, you can't move it anywhere. You just can't click on it either. Now, whenever you click on anything, you see that there are this bounding box that shows up. And this bounding box is going to show up for every layer you click on. It basically shows the boundary of every layer, like for this layer, and you can just move it around. Now, if you don't see this though, if you don't see it, you will just have to go to view and show layer controls. See if I disable that, for example, now it's disabled, then even if you click, you won't be able to see any bounding boxes. So yeah, you just click on show layer controls and you can watch the bounding boxes. And just like in other graphic programs like Photoshop or Illustrator, layers can be dragged above or below to change their stacking order. So for example, I want this table to be in front of this layer, which is the foreground layer. So what I'll do, I'll just take the table and put it in front of it. And as you can see, it just comes in front. So you can arrange the layers as well, however you want them to. Now we'll be diving more into the transform controls, which is actually how you animate. For that, I'll create a new composition. And again, you press Control N to create a new composition. And I'll call this transform controls. So what transform controls are, in short, is that they are basically every layer you add, there'll be transform controls to it, through which you can change its position, scale, rotation, or the anchor point and opacity. Now what these are, let me just explain. So if you use this tool called the ellipse tool here and just double click on it, you will get an ellipse. Now you can go under the ellipse and ellipse path, and just make it a circle by making both the dimensions the same. After that, if you just click on this and drop down and go into transform, you'll get all these transform settings. These are the same transform settings that are going to appear for every single layer you add to your screen. Now you don't have to concentrate on how I added this, because I will be going on using every tool, every shape layer afterwards as well. You just focus on what these transform controls are. The position is very obvious. You can just change the position if you drag. The first is the X coordinate and the second is the Y coordinate. So with this, you can change the X coordinate, and with this, you can change the Y coordinate. You just have to drag on it. The scale is, again, it's just the size. You can increase or decrease it. The rotation won't apply here, because even if you rotate a circle, it's not going to look any different, but you get the point of what it is. So let me just actually reduce its scale. I just increase it. Okay, I'll just reduce its scale. Maybe I'll put 35 as a better number. And what I'll do is I'll tell you what opacity is. Opacity is the transparency of every layer. If you reduce it, you will stop seeing it. And if you increase it, so these are like very obvious things. I don't think there's a lot of explanation needed for them. The anchor point, though, it's a very important concept. So an anchor point is basically around which every layer would like its transformations to take place. Now, what that means is the anchor point right now is at the center. So if I'm scaling it up, it's happening from the center. If you just look at it. Now, what would be a situation which is not this is when you change the anchor point, you just have to click on the layer and click on this tool called pan behind tool or the anchor point tool. You can also use the shortcut called Y. And you can just change the anchor point. For example, I put it at the top right. Then if you increase the scale, you will see that the scale is happening from the top right. It's not anymore happening from the center. So again, that's another important concept to keep in mind. So now that you're clear with all the transform controls, what I'll do, I'll start with the keyframes, the concept of keyframes, which actually enable us to animate. So okay, so if this is confusing in the start, it'll be a little confusing. I will have to go through a little quickly because we need to cover a lot today. But I'll add a lot of tutorials for you to watch, and also the recording will be with you, so you can slowly go through everything. So once you have the shape layer, I'll talk more about keyframes. So what a keyframe is, it's basically a marker that defines the value of a specific property. In this case, the property can be the position, scale, or rotation, anything. And you need to have at least two keyframes. So basically, you need to define the property at two different positions in time. in order for animation to happen. For example, if I click on the stopwatch here and make a keyframe and go maybe a second forward and change the position. So I've defined the position at 0 seconds here, and at the 1 second mark, I'll define it around here. So you can clearly see the object starts moving. It's because I've defined two different positions at two different points in time. This is how you are, this is the basic concept of a keyframe, and this is how you will have to create animations. So for example, I'll just give you another demonstration. Let me just create a rectangle. And again, you don't have to know how I'm creating the rectangle. I'll explain this later as well. I'm just showing you how keyframes can be applied. So for example, I have a thin block. So what I can do with this is I can move it around here. I can just move it however you want. If you press shift, it moves along the x-axis. So it doesn't go up or down, it just moves along the x-axis. So now you take the position and you define at 0 seconds, you're defining it right here. And maybe again, as I said, you control shift and arrow keys allow you to move 10 frames in once. So I'll press it 3 times. So I'll go 30 frames forward and click on the position keyframe again and just move it here. So now what I'm doing is defining the position of this block. Let me just press shift so it moves straightly. Okay. So now I'm defining the position at around 1 minute and 1 seconds and 6 frames. This is the time code. So 1 second at 6 frames, I'm defining it around here, and at 0, it's here. So when I play it, you can obviously see the block is animating. Some other transformations that we can change, if you just drop down here, some other transformations that I can change is the scale and rotation. Now, like obviously opening all of these just again and again, click on this will become difficult. So what you can do is, if you want position, you can press at P and position will open. If you want scale, you can press at S, scale will open. And for rotation, it's R. For opacity, it's T. So you don't have to remember them right now. Just keep following on. And for anchor point, you will not have to animate the anchor point, so you don't have to remember that. So for now, if I press position P, I'll open the position, which is already animated. And if I want to open the scale, I'll press S, and maybe then I'll animate it to around, again, I'll go 30 frames forward, and maybe I'll make it a little bigger. So this is how it's animating right now. If you can just press spacebar and preview it. Right. Now, now if you press at P, only the keyframes of position show up, and if you press S, only the keyframes of scale show up. What if you want to see both the keyframes, right? So you will press at U for that. So whenever you press U, you can display all the keyframes of your layer. So in that sense, if you press U, you can again display every single keyframe that you have in a layer. And so I hope keyframes make sense now, because it's a very simple concept. It's just you're defining parameters at two different positions in time, so that everything in between can be calculated by the software and animated. Okay. So again, now one more important thing that I would like to tell you is to label your layers. Whenever you make a new layer, always name it. Like for example, I can name this a block, because when you will be working in real-time projects, then you will have a lot of layers which might just become very messy. So you can name your layers as well. Right, so now we'll be talking about all the different kinds of layers that you can add to your composition. So let me just hide this block. So the first kind is when you right click on your gray panel, you can click on new and add a solid. It'll ask you for a few solid settings. The resolution, you can set it the same as your composition's resolution and give a name to it. The color can be anything. I'll just keep it white for now. And there you go, you have a solid. So again, you can You can use the solid as a background for your animations as well. And again, whenever you make a new composition, always recommend it to save your projects, because you don't want to lose. I'm not going to save this because this is just an introductory project file. You can just use Control S and save it. I am just in a habit of pressing Control S, which is why you were keep on seeing the pop-up screen. So okay. Anyway, the next layer that you can add is the adjustment layer, which is right here. The adjustment layer has no color, but I'll tell you what its purpose is. If I just hide the solid now and enable the block, and now what I'll do is I will press U to show up all my keyframes and remove all of them. To remove, you can just click on the stoppers again and the keyframes will get removed. Now I will duplicate this block. For duplicating, you can use Control D, and I'll just move it around and duplicate it again and move the new one around. And like this, you have 3 different duplicates of the same block. Now, what if I wanted each block to be blurred? I would add a blur effect, right? Now, you don't have to know what the blur effects are. I'll just add one for demonstration. So there's this effect called fast box blur. So if I add this to this layer, I can increase the blur, and sorry, I just added the adjustment layer. I can add this to the block and then I can blur it. If I wanted the second block to be blurred as well, I'll have to copy it from here, Control C to copy and paste it here. And as I said, all the effects that you apply to a layer shows up in the effect controls. And I can do it again for block 3. Now I just use the same effect 3 times on 3 different layers. Now the more layers you have, uh, this might increase the usage of memory on your PC. So what you can do is, instead of adding the same effect 3 times on these 3 layers, you can add it to an adjustment layer. Now what an adjustment layer will do, it will add any effect you add to this, it will add the same effect on every layer below it. So if I just disable every single effect, for disabling, you can just click on the effects icon and it will get disabled. As you see, the blur is no more attached to these blocks. And then I'll copy this fast box blur and put it to the adjustment layer, after which I will just enable it. And as you can see, every single thing gets blurred, right? So you can just add any effects to this and every single layer beneath will get affected by it. So you don't have to keep adding the same effect to a lot of layers, which can save you memory, save you time, and a lot of things. Another one layer that you can add is called a null. Now let me just add it. I'll just delete the adjustment in the solid. I can press on new and click on null object and I can add a new null. So what a null does, it's as it sounds, it's nothing. It's just a null object. It has you can't see it. It has no properties for itself. But what you can generally do is, if you uh, take all of these layers and parent them to this. Now, what is parenting? Parenting allows you to make layers the child layer of one single parent layer. And how do you do that is, when you select a couple of layers, again, you can click on one, press shift and select the last one, all of them get selected. So you can use this pick whip, the parent pick whip, and parent it to the null. Now every single block is a child layer of this parent null. And whenever you do anything to this parent null, every single child will follow the same path. So if I'm moving this up here, everything is following it. And that is the main purpose of a null layer. I will not be going into deep. I'm just going uh, through everything at quicker speed. So now I guess you are familiar with the interface. You just need to know what each layer does and how the panels work with each other. Now I'll just go through the next part, which is where we'll be experimenting more animation. Before that, I'll just share the slides so I can revise whatever we saw. Uh, we can revise whatever we saw right now. So the first one was obviously panels. Panels are sections that give you access to various tools. The next part is how we made a new composition. We use the Control N to make a new composition. And These are the three main things that we changed, which were the resolution, the frame rate, and the duration of your composition. The few do's and don'ts are that you should not stress a lot more the resolution is. You can just either use a 1080p HD or the Instagram Reel dimensions. And another thing is that more FPS doesn't mean a better video. As I said, never increase your FPS above 30. Just keep it either 24 or 30. And make the duration of composition longer than you expect your video to be, which is like a safety measure and also prevents a lot of mess happening. So the next thing we saw was to import our artwork. We double clicked on the project panel, or you can also use Control I as the shortcut. And you should select the composition, retain layer sizes option. When you get when we got the option, we clicked on the composition one. The next thing we saw was transform controls, where we went upon anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And we also covered parenting with the help of an example with the null layer, when it just allows you to make a layer another layer's child, in which case the child layer will follow all the transformations the parent layer performs. Transformations in the sense it's just the position, scale, rotation, and opacity. Now we'll see what pre-compositions are. For that, I will move into the next part, which is the animation principles, where we'll be just focusing on easing, squash and stretch, anticipation, and follow through. If I can just change my screen back to After Effects. So I'll be opening a new project file. I'll open my recent project file, which was the animation principles, where I'll be basically going through everything. So the first part we'll be going is the types of easing that we have. Now, what easing does, as you already saw, we were basically just animating it at a very linear easing, which was not looking smooth. I'm going to again hide these layers by pressing on the I button. And if you see, I've already animated this. This is going from the left to the right. We have already seen this. We just defined positions at specific units of time. Now, this looks it looks very linear and not smooth, obviously. So what you could do in this case is to select these keyframes. Now you could just drag over them and select them, or you could click on the parameter itself, which is the X position, and you can select them. Now you might be wondering how position became X position. That is a very easy thing. What you do is, if you have any shape layer, if you have any shape layer and you press Control and Shift together, you can scale it. You can scale it while keeping all the aspects in a specific ratio and make a perfect circle. Now, if you press P again, you're going to see the position. Now, how do you make it X position? Is when you right click on it and press on separate dimensions, it becomes X position, Y position, and you can change them separately and make separate keyframes for them. So anyway, getting back to this, we have an animation of X position where it's just going from the left to the right. Now, how do you make this smoother? You just click on the parameter and right click keyframe assistant and click on easy ease. The other way you can do that is to use a shortcut. I just pressed Control Z to go back. You can press Control Z. It's a universal shortcut for undoing, so you can undo. And I wanted you to show the other shortcut, which is F9. If you press F9, you can ease it as well. Now, if you watch this, 1 second, I'll just hide the other layers. So if you watch this looks a lot smoother than the previous one, but it still lacks a lot of personality and isn't very smooth at the moment too. So to change this, what you do is you again select any one of the keyframe or select both the keyframes, doesn't matter. You just select the keyframe and press on this option called the graph editor. The graph editor is where you can manipulate the graphs between these two keyframes. Now, if I explain you using the value graph, you can see that it starts from around less than 500 and goes till 1500. And what are these? There's the pixels, right? There's the position. So if you go here, you can already see this is at 360. The position is in 360, and that is as well a little bit less than 500. So it starts at 360 and it goes till 1560. These are just the pixel values that you form. If you move this to the left, you can see the pixel values are also changing in the parameter. So let me just undo it like how it was. So as you can see, the layer is moving from left to the right, and when we added the easing, it just eased the corners a little bit. Now, if I change it back to the normal easing, for example, I go back and select the keyframes and I control click on them, then they become again normal, back to the normal keyframes. Then I select them and go back to the graph editor. They look very linear right now. This is the position against time graph. So as you can see, the position is in the x-axis, and I mean the time is in the x-axis, position is in the y-axis. So as you can see, it's a very linear graph. There's not any change in speed that's happening. But when we select them now and press F9 to easy ease, it becomes a little smooth in the start. Now, what does smooth mean? What it's doing is it's a little slow in the start, and then it gains speed, and at the end it becomes slow again. Now, how do I tell this? Is because earlier you could see that it was traveling equal distances in equal intervals of time, but now it's just traveling a lot less in the first few seconds and then gain speed in the middle. To make this a lot more extreme, you can bring the handles to the corners and make the graph a lot more steep. Now you can see that in the middle, it is traveling a lot of distance and it's a lot steep in the middle. The more steep it is, or the more slope it has, it is going to be a lot more faster. So now if you watch the animation, it's a lot more, it's a lot more smoother. It starts from being slow in the mid start, and then becomes fast in the middle, and again becomes slow at the end. So this is how you would generally want to make your easings. Another way to do a easing is to change to speed graph, but I generally recommend you to just use the value graph and just master one graph at one time. So you can just use the value graph for now. Now, this was one example of how you could do it. You could have it start slow, become very fast in the middle, and then again become slow at the end. Another way to do this is how I'll be demonstrating it in the next one. So this is I'll rename this to fast in middle. If you want to rename, you can just click and press enter to rename anything. So this is fast in middle as it is. It's fast in the middle, and I'll rename this to fast in start, and I'll show you how I change that. So again, we are back at being at the linear animation. Again, I'm going to click on the parameter, click F9, go to the graph editor, and I see the same easy ease that we saw. Now to make it, okay, I just clicked off by mistake, and how do I get back? I click on the parameter again, and I can get back. So this thing, we're going to make it fast in the start. So to make it fast in the start, theoretically, we'll have to make it a lot more steeper in the starting. So how will we do that? We'll make the handle go up like this. So it's a lot steeper in the start, and it becomes a lot more flat towards the end. So if you see this, it's going to be a lot faster in the start. Like it just went through so many pixels in the first few frames. If you see it again and preview it, so this is how you would want to create an animation which is fast in the start. Going back into a normal layers panel, we'll want to do the fast and end this time. So I'll again hide the one which is fast and start and select this layer and enable it. So again, the same thing, we'll click on the parameters, press F9, go into the graph editor. And this time we want it to be very fast in the end. So what we'll do is we'll make it steeper towards the end by moving the handles like this, and maybe bring this side too, so it becomes a lot more steep. And again, if you want to move these, if you can't move them straightly by yourself, you can press on shift and just align it to the x-axis to move it like that. And now it's very fast at the end, right? It's very slow in the start, and it just whooshes into the end position. So this is the basic, these are the three basic easings that you will be performing almost every time. So this is what I told you. These are the extreme cases of easing: fast in middle, fast in end, and fast in start are what we discussed. This is the generic F9 ease as it's written in the we just select F9 and that just happens. The next one I'm going to talk to you, it's a little different. It's there are two types actually. One of them is a control click. So if you control click when it's easy, you know it becomes linear. I've already told about this. And again, I'm going to undo so it's back into being easy eased. Now, if I control click these linear keyframes, which aren't easy, then they become this type of circle kind of a structure. What this does, it's like an intermediate between the easy ease and the linear keyframe. It's still smooth, but it's not as smooth as the easy ease, but it's a little more smoother than the linear ones. Now, this might have various cases where you would want to use it, but there are very less scenarios when you actually would use this. Another type of keyframe is called the hold keyframe, for which you'll have to hold Control, Alt, and click on this. And then this becomes like a half hourglass. It becomes like half of this ease, if you notice it. What this will do, it will hold the animation as its name goes, hold keyframe. It will just hold it. It will not let it move. As you can see, no animation is happening. And just at the end moment, when the playhead just goes over this keyframe, it changes. So there's a hold keyframe is going to hold your animation. There's no animation going to happen in the middle, and at the end you will just see that the position changes. Again, I've written here to label the layers, so I'm quickly just going to label my layers as well. These three, I can just select all of them, click on the color, and just label them any color. For example, I made the pink, and this can be a yellowish color. So you have to label your layers whenever you can. It's a very important practice and makes it a lot less messy. The next thing we're going to talk about is the pre-compositions. Now, compositions can be of two types. One was the render comp that we originally made, which we will actually finally render. That's the final composition. But if you just store everything in your final composition, when you will start working in actual projects, you will go through a lot of layers. So in that case, what will happen is a lot of layers will just accumulate, and finally, uh, you won't be able to finish. You won't be able to keep everything organized, and end up not finishing a project because it'll get very messy. So when you have similar layers, what you can do is press on Control Shift C to pre-compose them. Pre-composing them means that a new composition will be made of these three layers, wherein you can basically just name it. You can name it the extreme cases, as these do contain the extreme cases as we just saw. And if you do move all attributes into the new composition, all of these layers will move into the new composition that is going to be made. So if I press on OK, as you can see, a new composition has been made. This icon tells you that it's a composition. This is how we were even going to create the new composition in the start. So if you double click here, you go into the new composition where you can see only these three layers exist and not the other layers that were there. And you can just move the compositions in the top from here. This is the extreme cases one. This was the one which you were just seeing right now, which when I was telling you the types of easings. And now if I hide, open or show all of these, you can see them happening. Okay, so this was the main part, which is where we were discussing the types of easing. Now I think we are running a little short in time, so I'll just discuss the animation principles, and then maybe we can give the task to you as well. So the animation principles. So what the animation principles mean is that when you convert a linear animation into something that looks a lot good, you use a lot of animation principles. Now, if I want, what I can do, I'll just animate this simply position animation. I can just make a keyframe, put it to the side, go again 30 frames and bring it to the other side. and you can see there's linear animation happening. Then I can select it, press F9, and give a little easing to it. As we saw, we can just make it extreme fast in the middle, and that's the animation you get. This is already the first principle discussed, which is called the easing principle, where you just made the animation look a lot smoother. So what we're going to do now is that we will add a little bit of anticipation to this. Now, what anticipation means is that whenever you are going to start, and whenever something's going to start, you will have to be hinted that it's actually going to start. For example, if you are trying to throw a baseball, you will move a little backwards so you gain some energy and finally actually throw the ball. So we're going to do the same in this. I will just move the keyframes a little forward. Now what happens is that the ball directly starts moving to the right. So whenever you're watching this, you will not recognize, okay, it's going to start moving. So you need some kind of animation that tells you that, okay, this is going to start now. So for that, we use anticipation. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll just move the ball a little backwards and then again move it forward so it anticipates. So for example, I'll make another keyframe like 1, 2, 3 frames back. But let's go 5, and I'll make a keyframe. I'll just copy the keyframe, Control C, Control V. And on this keyframe, I'll move the position a little back. So I could just use the arrow keys and move it a little back. Now, if you see, it goes a little backwards and it goes forward. So it's giving you a little idea. Okay, when it goes backwards, you kind of get an indication that the ball is now going to move forward. Now to smoothen this out, again, you go into the graph editor. And what you will like to do, you can zoom into the graph editor using the mouse wheels and Alt. So you zoom into it and you just make the graph look a lot smoother. Now, if you look at it, it's not smooth. It's just going like this and like this. So you have to make it smoother, the transition between these two graphs a lot smoother. So for that, what you can do is to move this handle downwards and this handle a little more straight. So now if you look at it, it looks a lot more smoother. And now if you watch the animation, you get to get a lot smoother animation in this case. Right. So now the next thing we'll be covering is the next principle. So now we will, for example, now we were covering anticipation, which we just saw now. The next principle is called follow through. Okay. So what happens in follow through is that, okay, so what happens in follow through is even after your whole motion is done, you generally go a little forward with the speed you were already in. So if you're running at a very high speed, before stopping, you will move a little forward and then come back to the rest position. That's the same in this case. The ball will go a little bit forward and then again come back to its final position. So I'll do the same. I'll move 5 frames forward. I'll copy the same keyframe. This will be the final position. And in this keyframe, I'll change the position a little bit forward. I'll make the ball go a little front. Again, go into the graph, just zoom in, make the graph a lot more smoother. So, this is like an S, if you might call it. If you see the animation finally, I think the end is a little too fast. So maybe I make this a little more smooth in the end. So again, I'm zooming out and now I can see the whole animation. Now that's what we just used all the animation principles and made the linear animation that we had in the start make a lot more better and smoother. As you can see, we have ran out of time already. Or what I'll do otherwise as well, I'll just record myself doing it and then I can add it in the cheat sheet as well. So then I'll send you the recording separately of that along with the recording of today's session, which you can follow to complete your task. Hello everyone, this is the continuation to today's session. In this recording, I'll be covering the ball bounce animation and also elaborate the task. Before I start, I would like to revise a few things we had already done. So, first of all, we had talked about After Effects' interface, and then we saw how keyframes worked. After which, we saw a few cases of how you can ease your keyframes. The first case that we saw was of simple easy ease, where we just again, if you click U, you can open all your keyframes as we had already discussed. So when it's easy eased, it has this hourglass looking shape. You can control click to make it linear back again, and again you can just F9 to make it easy eased. The other cases that we saw were the extreme cases. If I go into the pre-composition, we also talked about pre-comping. So there were three layers in this. We made all of them into pre-comp using the shortcut control Shift C, and then and then we opened the pre-comp, and there were these three layers already inside them. The first one that we saw was the fast in middle, where it had a curve, something like this, and I'm pressing Alt and using my mouse scroll to zoom in. We similarly saw the other two cases as well. Right? So the last case that we saw was the hold keyframes, where the animation would just jump from one position to the other, and there'll be no animation happening in between the keyframes. If you see this, it just jumps. Now we will be covering how to do the ball bounce animation. Before we get into the animation itself, I would like to import a file. Right. So I would like to show you something. Okay. All right. So we'll be covering how to do the ball bounce animation now. Before I directly get into the animation part, I'll explain you how actually a ball bounce works. So generally, if a ball is falling from a height, and let's assume that it is not a heavy ball, it's a bouncing ball. So what generally happens is that once it falls down, it loses some energy, and gradually, as you see, it keeps losing energy and eventually just goes into rest. So we'll be using this uh, similar kind of a motion for achieving our animation as well. And so let's go back to our composition. If you see here, I have made a new composition with the Instagram dimensions that I talked about, where the width is 1080 and 1080 pixels and the height is 1920 pixels. For the floor, if you can see this line, just so I tell you how I created it, I'll just delete it for now. And I use the pen tool for it. We'll be going a lot more deeper into shape layers in our later sessions. But I just use the pen tool, just clicked once here and held shift and clicked again to draw a path, and just applied a stroke to it so it acts like a floor. And again, always rename a layer, so I named it floor and dragged it down to act like a floor. And then I put it down and I locked it because I don't want to interact with it at all. Now another thing that I would like to tell you here is a mechanism called shying layers. So when you have a lot of accumulation of layers and you just don't want to use a certain group of layers, like for example, the floor, I don't think I'll ever be using this in this animation. It's just acting as something that I want to see. Now, obviously, I can lock it, but it still occupies space in my layers panel. And if I delete it, it's gone. So I somehow need it to be gone while it's still existing in my animation, obviously. So for that, what I can do is I can shy it. I can press this button and shy it and click on here. So it will just hide it, but it's still visible. It's just shied from our layers panel. So with this, we can save a lot of space, especially when you are having a lot of layers. If I press this back again, it comes back. So now what I'll do, I'll just lock it. It's shied already, and I'll press the shy button so it goes off. It's now continuing with the animation. We'll be mainly working with the Y position parameter for this. So I'll click on P, The dimensions, I've already separated them. You can again just right click and separate dimensions like this. So you'll make a keyframe in the Y position, press U to show the keyframe, and we'll start with the animation, right? So I was thinking that the first drop should take around 15 frames, and that's like a good estimate. 15 frames is pretty good measure for a drop of a ball. So I'll go 15 frames forward, Control Shift right arrow key once for 10 frames, and Control and right arrow key 5 times for 15. Now I'll just drag it down. So it just, again, I'm using the hand tool. It's very useful. Used Alt and scroll wheel to zoom in, zoom out. So the first animation has happened. After this, we will not be doing any animation. We'll just be placing keyframes at intervals that's reducing. So it's 15 frames here. The next keyframe we'll do will be at an interval of 14 frames, and then 13, 12, 11, 10, and then we'll slowly reduce it. So what we'll do, we'll go 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 14, copy paste, 10, 1, 2, 3, 13, copy paste, 1, 2. Just, you don't have to be very exact. You can just be estimating this. Just make sure there's a decline in the spacing between the keyframes. And I think that much is enough for now. What we'll do, I'll easy is F9, go into the value graph and start the animation. So what we'll do, when the ball is falling, obviously it is certain that it will start gaining speed, and at the end, just before it strikes the ground, will be where its speed is maximum. So we'll be making it very steep around here. So its speed is maximum at the end. You can see this. This is a lot more realistic, although I think it's a little too steep. So I'll just make it a little smoother. I just clicked out, so I can click on this to get back my keyframes. I think that's smooth enough. After this, what you do is you use the pen tool and make points roughly in the middle of every keyframe. And when you make points using the pen tool on a line, you are indirectly just, oh wait, you're just directly creating keyframes. So that's what we're going to be doing. Again, going to graph editor. So between these two keyframes, you will be making points. And what you do with these points is drag them down. Now, as you drag them down, you can see that your ball is moving up, right? And this is how we'll be achieving the bouncing animation. Now, obviously, it's first, as you saw in the picture that I showed, the first position is the highest, and gradually the height decreases. So maybe we can keep the height here. These are just estimates. I'm not like calculating anything. And you just make the graph where the angles are constant. Just make sure that it's smooth. Just do the same in the next one as well. Just drag it down. Do this. And yes, you just have to continue doing this. Just reduce the height and keep doing it till the end. I will just skip to the part where I'm done with it. So I've done it, and this is how it looks. If it plays, okay. Okay. I think that I should be losing the height a little quicker, because then it seems a little abrupt at the end. So let me just fix that. That should look better. Yeah, I think that looks better. Right, so that's how you generally achieve the ball bounce animation. In case you have any other queries, you can fill the form at exen.co/22/elite queries, and this link will be active throughout the induction process, so you can fill it anytime you have any query. And thank you for watching today's session. Good luck for your task.